The first reading today is taken from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 to 10. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of the Lord was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel," and he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not know the Lord yet, and the word of the Lord had not been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Word of God, word of life. The second reading is taken from John chapter 1, verses 43 to 51. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God descending and ascending upon the Son of Man." Word of God, word of life.
Grace and peace to you from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. There is a word in church vocabulary that strikes dread and fear into the hearts of millions. Any guesses on the word? What? Did you say evangelism? Ding, 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 we have a winner. You are the only one that's gotten it all morning. Evangelism. Run for the doors, right? Is anyone excited about the idea of evangelism? Okay. I've noticed that there's about one person at every service who actually likes the idea of evangelism. And they'll raise their hand and say, "Yeah, I love it." Kitties are one person, right? Pastor Paul doesn't really count because you sort of have to do it by part of the job. Yeah, I have to tell you, evangelism is not my favorite word either, okay? And I have had different experiences with evangelism. Some have gone well, some not so well. I have two favorites. My first favorite was when I was in college. I took a class called evangelism. And the people that taught the class had been missionaries, and they had these wonderful stories of how they had gone to Africa and shared their faith with all sorts of people, and the whole villages turned and became followers of Jesus. And so then they told us the best place to evangelize is on an airplane, because the person sitting next to you has nowhere to go. You're a captive audience. So I tried it once, and I ended up with the worst date of my life out of it. It didn't quite go to event anyway. Yeah. And then the other time was we were doing we were trying to start like a new project in Maryland, and we were knocking on doors to invite people to come to an event that we were hosting, trying to start a new faith community. And the first door I went up to, my heart was hammering inside my chest. And I remember telling the person I was with, "You go first." And so that person knocked on the door, and they opened up the door, and they weren't real excited to come to whatever we were promoting. And after about the fifth door closing on us, we kind of were like, well, now we know what it's like. It can't get any worse, right? But evangelism is a scary thing, because a lot of us feel like before we go and share our faith, we're supposed to have all of the answers to our faith, right? If somebody asks me a question as I'm trying to share my faith, what do I say? What do I do? I don't know. A lot of people say, I don't know enough about the Bible to be able to talk about it. A lot of people say, I'm not really sure about my faith, so I don't really want to go and share that with others, and I don't want to interfere with where people are, because everyone has a right to be wherever they're at, right? Politically correct, all that stuff, right? But we still can't ignore the fact that Jesus commands us to go and make disciples and teach and baptize. So we still have to deal with evangelism, even though it is not the most comfortable thing we deal with. But today's gospel lesson is the best story of evangelism that I have ever come across, because it is such a great way to do evangelism, and it takes all the pressure off of us as followers of Jesus. So let's talk about it a little bit, okay? Last week, those of you that were here, you heard the story of how Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. And immediately following that, he goes off into the wilderness, and he deals with all sorts of temptations from the devil. And you're going to hear about that in a few weeks. We'll get to that story. But then right after that, he comes back, and he starts recruiting for his team of people to help him share the good news of God. So the first people he finds are some fishermen. Now, John's gospel story tells it a little different than the others, but basically he comes to the fishermen, Simon Peter, and his brother Andrew, and he says, "Come follow me," and they drop their nets and they follow. Remember that story from Sunday school? Fishers of men, the whole song thing? Okay. So they follow Jesus. And then the next day, they've started off their journey with Jesus, and they encounter their friend Philip. And they say, "Philip, we got to tell you about this guy, Jesus." Now, I don't know much about Philip. I don't really know, like, what his life was like, what he did for a living, if he was a fisherman like the others, if they just knew him from being around or growing up together. I don't know anything about Philip. But somehow, when Philip was invited to follow Jesus, he was all in. He was ready to go. Something about Jesus had impacted Philip's life, and it changed him forever. And he was willing to let everything go and follow Jesus. Well, Philip then is so excited that he gets to follow Jesus, and that he's found Jesus. Or maybe Jesus has found him. It's probably a better way to look at that. That he can't help but go and tell his friend Nathanael. So he says to Nathanael, "Nathanael, we found the one that Moses talked about, the one that the prophets talked about. We found the one that we've all been waiting for. And Nathanael is not quite as exuberant as Philip. I don't know if you got that from the reading. But Nathanael says, Jesus from Nazareth? What good comes out of Nazareth? He's a little resistant. I kind of have him like going like this. Nazareth? What good comes out of Nazareth? Because Nazareth is a tiny, sorry about that, tiny little town in the hill country of Galilee. Nothing's going on there. It's not very big. It's all kind of built up against the hillside. You know, not a lot of room to work, only a couple hundred people. Kind of a typical kind of podunk kind of town. It's about half the population of Indian Springs. Can you get half the population of Indian Springs? Okay, so we're talking a small little town. Everybody knows everybody's business and you know, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's still rumors floating around about Jesus through Nazareth. Nothing good comes from Nazareth because nothing comes from Nazareth. But here's the surprising thing about God. God takes places that wouldn't be anything on a map, and he makes them someplace special. And God takes people that come from those kind of places and makes them somebody special. It's kind of neat the way God works and changes everything that we think. I actually had the opportunity to go to Nazareth, and there's a church now that's built over the house where Mary lived. And I remember one of my friends saying to my professor when I was in seminary, she said, so did Mary actually live here, or did they just kind of choose a place and built a church over it? And my professor said, well, if Mary didn't live here, she lived within 100 feet of here. Right there. But God takes those tiny little places and makes them someplace special. Now, Philip knows that there's some resistance from Nathanael because of all this Nazareth stuff. So he can sense that, I'm sure. But he doesn't engage in debate. He doesn't sit down and say, oh, but Nazareth is, you know, there's good things happening. It's all good. You know, don't worry about it. He doesn't get into that kind of debate. Trick one about evangelism, right? Instead, he says to Nathanael, come and see. That's it. Now, I don't know what Nathanael is thinking. I don't know if he's a little worried about Philip, thinking that maybe he drank some Kool-Aid or something. Or maybe he's a little protective of his friend and concerned about what's happening here. Or maybe he's actually genuinely curious about this Jesus person that Philip is so excited about. But either way, he decides to go. So he goes with his friend, and before they can even talk to Jesus, Jesus sees them coming. And he says to Nathanael, he says, I know you. You are a true Israelite. You are a person without deceit. Well, that's an introduction, isn't it? What does that mean to be a true Israelite? Basically, what that tells us about Nathanael is that he was a person who lived out his Jewish faith in a righteous way. He lived out his faith. He walked the faith. He understood all of the traditions and the Old Testament. He knew them, and they were a part of his life. And being without deceit, I think he just didn't have a lot of pretense. You know, he said what he thought, and if you didn't like what he said, it was kind of, oh, well. He wasn't going to tell you what you wanted to hear that he didn't believe to be truthful. So that's kind of Nathanael. And Jesus sees that in him. And he's thrown off. Well, how did you see that? Well, I saw you under a fig tree. Okay, again, side note, fig tree? It's kind of random. But the truth is that fig trees had a great symbolism throughout the Bible. Fig trees were used for protection. Fig trees were used to show prosperity. Fig trees were used as kind of a sign of peace and a peaceful place to be. Lots of shade under the fig tree. And by Jesus recognizing Nathanael being under the fig tree, he's recognizing that Nathanael at his core is a person of peace and well-being. And he really is able to see Nathanael. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not every person that we encounter who gets to see who we really are, right? Because a lot of us put up our masks and we put up our walls and we open the window so as people can see exactly what we want to show them, especially those of us on social media, right? We post the cute picture of the kids and not the picture of the kids going, because then people might not think that our life is anything but calm, right? Right? Picture perfect. But that's not what Jesus cares about. Because Jesus wants to go deeper. Jesus sees inside of us and sees the good and the bad and the ugly. Jesus sees it, and he doesn't look away. Instead, he looks deeper. He goes deeper because he knows that who we are on the inside is precious to God. Now, when we are able to be opened up and vulnerable, that's when God can come in and do real transformation in our lives, is it not? But we have to let that mask fall down. We have to be open to it. Now, I know there are some people in our world that we think, oh, they've got it all together. And one of those people I always thought had it all together was Martin Luther King Jr. I always thought he is such a giant of faith. And the other day, Abigail learned about him in school, and I found this really interesting quote that talked about a moment when he was laid bare before God and how that moment transformed him. It's in a book he wrote called Stride Toward Freedom. And let me read it to you. I can't really do the Martin Luther King Jr. voice, so you just got to hear it in your head. I was ready to give up. With my cup of coffee sitting untouched before me, I tried to think of a way to move out of the picture without being a coward. In this state of exhaustion, when my courage had all but gone, I decided to take my problem to God. With my head in my hands, I bowed over the kitchen table and prayed aloud. The words I spoke to God that midnight are still vivid in my memory. I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right, but now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and if I stand before them without strength or courage, they too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I've come to the point where I can't face it alone. At that moment, I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never experienced God before. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, "Stand up for justice, stand up for truth, and God will be at your side forever." Almost at once, my fears began to go. My uncertainty disappeared. I was ready to face anything. Real transformation in our lives happens when we are laid bare and we let God see who we are. You know, at those moments of transformation, sometimes they happen over a quick period of time. Sometimes they're caused by an incident, or sometimes it's just part of our journey of faith. But in those moments, God comes in. Christ comes in and takes away all of the worry, the doubt, the ugliness, and puts joy and love and peace in our hearts. That's a great thing, right? I pray that we've all experienced that at some point or another. But the reality is that there are plenty of others who've never experienced that before, who've never known the love of God before. And so to them, we are invited to be Phillips. We are invited to invite them into a relationship with Jesus. Now, how do we do that? Do we go and we stand on a street corner and we preach and we wag our finger and all that kind of stuff? Or do we simply say to someone, come and see? Come and see is pretty easy, isn't it? Can we try it? 1, 2, 3. Come and see. It's not hard. Now, I know there's a lot of things that are easier to talk about than faith. I mean, we could talk about, your favorite restaurant that you have ever eaten at, right? That's easy to talk about. A house renovation, you can talk about that. That one's easy. Your accomplishments of your kids, those are all easy things. But come and see is pretty easy too. Come and see our church. We're building a new building. Come and see, we've got these awesome crosses that look out over the city. Come and see our worship, because it's so uplifting with the music and Pastor Paul's preaching. I take a nap during Pastor Kathy, but that's okay. Come and see. She usually doesn't call you out for it. Come and see, we've got kids stuff going on. Come and see, we've got chili. Chili. Come and see. Come and see what God is doing in this place. Come and see my friends who have made me part of this family. Come and see my child get baptized in the water here. I'm so excited for you guys. Come and see our prayer group and be lifted up and prayed for. Come and see our Bible study as we learn and grow together. Come and see. It's not that hard. Last week, Pastor Paul issued a challenge for a New Year's resolution to read through the entire book of Mark. And one of our high schoolers has already started the challenge. He told me on Monday night at youth group. He's like, yeah, I've already started. I said, really? How far did you get? He said, oh, not too far, just until Pastor Paul stopped preaching. No, what happens in youth group stays in youth group, right, guys? I'm not telling who it was. Besides, he's not even here today, so. But honestly, what if we take on another resolution? A resolution to say, come and see to our friends. Come and see the new song that God is growing and singing. Amen.